Hi everyone. Thank you for joining me. Whatever time that you're able to log in. And yeah, thank you for that lovely little bit of grace. Where I'm filling in for Bon for your deep dive this week and looking forward to it. And just a little reminder that I will be available for questions, any comments that you want underneath the video. Yeah, just let me know and I will be able to support. I just on a Friday, I have my son. He'll start school next year, so it's just one more year with him. But I will be able to kind of keep a little eye on my messages, phone, and check into the Facebook page. But a little bit harder to present with my little man running around. 3 is a very busy age. So yes. Thank you for joining me and welcome to the session tonight or today, whatever, this morning, whatever point at which you are able to catch up on it. And Bon had set me the lovely concept of it's one of my favorite things to talk about. It's that there are so many people out here in this world who have experienced trauma, but everybody's story is so different. But we're going to talk today about growing beyond trauma and how many people find that sometimes, like experiencing trauma, it can start to build like a new identity for us. It's quite a powerful way to reflect upon the impact trauma can have on us. And we'll look a little bit at some of those key idealizations and explore that. So really, truly, I can vouch for this because my job role has changed, my passions, my studies, kind of maybe what I feel is my life purpose. And it's all come since, really tackling trauma in my life. So it says when someone begins to heal, like starts that healing process, which you're all really digging deep into, well done you. When someone begins to heal from trauma, one of the hardest questions they face then is, what do I want to be now? Because trauma doesn't just hurt in the moment, it kind of starts to shape that identity. It kind of becomes so much more than something that happened. It becomes us. And then we start to realize it's just a piece of our story. And what do we do with that piece of our story? So, yeah, it tells a story about who a person is, what they deserve, and what role they should play in the world. And then when we're healing, when that healing really begins, those old stories, they don't just disappear, they linger, they pull, they conflict with a new version of yourself as a person that's trying to rebuild. So we're going to explore like this idea of the self, of identity, and how there's a pull between, the healing, growing self and the person that we became, the person. I often like the phrase like, it's not that it's a bad place. We've become that. We've come that, to this identity based on our trauma, based on this experience that we've had, based on survival. We know so much about how it's like a survival route. But now actually we're going to explore how the post-traumatic growth can really reshape identity and why it feels so personal and individual, and why the process is often so filled with this inner conflict, especially when it comes to things like family duty or guilt or unresolved trauma, still strong emotions and the fear of change. All of that comes within all of it. So there's this pull, there's almost this like part of us that wants to do something with this, to grow, to shift, to change who we are, to rebuild, which is exactly, the process of healing. But there's a pull in many other directions as well. And let's kind of reflect on that. So that's kind of our topic today, post-traumatic growth, building a new identity. Let's have a little explore. So we'll start with that post-traumatic growth. So that word growth, growing, shifting, changing, in what we would imagine like a new way of thinking. And the term comes from psychology research by I'm not very good with his last name, but it's Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun. So Richard Tedeschi, it's Tedeschi, and Lawrence Calhoun. And they studied people who had survived the crises, survived serious illnesses, loss, abuse, even war. And what they found was really quite powerful. Not everyone just survived trauma. Many people grew from it. They found like a new meaning, deeper relationships, and a stronger sense of who they really wanted to become, what their purpose was. Um, and that's what post-traumatic growth is. It's by definition, it's the ability to build a new identity beyond trauma. Awesome. But here's the thing. It's obviously, not the same for everyone. One person might really discover a new passion for helping others. Another might realize they want to finally put themselves first. And maybe it's both, maybe it's different, but there's sometimes this realization like, hey, I'm gonna shift the way that I'm doing things and I'm gonna change. Someone else might decide that they want a simpler, more peaceful life. It might be actually that I'm going to slow this down and I'm going to make a big shift in maybe my working ways and in order to create this little bit more mindful, peaceful experience. And I guess the question is why is it just so deeply individual? And it's because trauma is individual. No two of us will experience the same as what you have, what others around us have. It's quite powerful to reflect. We can maybe find some empathy because situations might be similar, but it's never the same. We're all different people, different backgrounds, different, you know, everything. So each person's trauma story shapes their beliefs about themselves, the world, the relationships. It's all different. So naturally, the way they grow out of it will be unique too. And I think that's exciting. I think, it's a lovely, reflection that there's no right and wrong way to grow. It's about, thinking about for you, what could this look like? Or are you starting to experience some of this? Have you kind of felt that pull to, in other kind of work you might have done in the healing journey? But I've got a really nice question for you. So it's one that I often do. I sometimes myself, when I'm feeling a little bit stuck or in that space of rumination, I will get out a pen and paper and I will ask myself this question. And if you imagine your future self 5 years from now, and that future self is free from the weight of trauma. So 5 years, future self, totally free from the weight of it. I'm not saying that, we can't erase that it happened. And it is part of us, it's a puzzle piece. But what would that look like? What do you see? Who are you in that picture? And what are you maybe doing differently? And if you're watching this, obviously we have an opportunity to watch it on replay. So pause this maybe and grab a piece of paper. A really great way to do this. It's many different routes. If writing is not your thing, you don't have to. But I often think like I sometimes draw like it's my stick man approach. I often go through this with you guys with different theories and questions. But I sometimes do the stick man approach. I'll draw myself or a stick person, sorry, stick person approach. We'll draw a stick person and in and around the stick person, we would be able to just explore like words, phrases, colors, maybe you draw pictures, whatever suits you. What does that feel like? I often, the first thing that comes to mind is like a big deep breath. Like that's how I would imagine like wanting to feel like I could take this big deep breath that, there's a lightness. Maybe I've had people draw like wings, they feel this sense of freedom. But if, the question again is if you imagine yourself 5 years from now, free from the weight of trauma, what do you see? Who are you in that picture? Like, what does that represent? What words could represent and capture the feelings that you want to feel? Going back to everybody's individual, is it peace? Is it having, time for self-care? Is it, feeling joy more? Is it, whatever it is, if you know it's what you don't want to feel like, you can add those words in as well. But it's about thinking a little bit about what are the feelings? What does that look like? If you could picture yourself, even visualize it as well. Such a lovely thing. And I want to highlight like there is no perfect answer. This isn't about having a perfect answer, but it's a start, right? It's a start for you. It's starting for you to imagine what's actually truly possible when trauma no longer defines identity. And I think that's powerful. If you come back to one of the modules that I had led, I don't know if, where you might be within that, but the power of visualization and working with our reticular activating system, it starts to plant little seeds. And then we start to allow some of those good thoughts to begin to creep back in and allow ourselves to see the good, not all just the negative. And so we start to plant those seeds for what the aspiration is. We start to think about it. You can add to the picture. You can come back to the question. Like I said, I do it in loads of different interims within my life. I personally felt very, even if we're thinking about identity, there's many different aspects of life where you're like, who am I? What do I want to be? And so obviously it's powerful to do in terms of a post-trauma experience, but this is also a wonderful exercise if you just feeling stuck in any way, shape, or form. Just start to ask yourself, instead of just kind of sleepwalking through, ask yourself, if I'm not feeling the way that I want to feel, what is it that I want? How do I want that to look? What is that going to feel like in my body? What does that look like in my face? How does that present in my energy? What I'm choosing to do, where I'm going. So you've got this, like you really do. And it is powerful to think that we can almost like redefine our whole self, and that trauma can be a driving force in that. But this brings me to this like little dichotomy, this little push and pull. We've got two sides of the rope, and I want you to explore. We're going to talk a little bit about the old way versus the new way. So trauma stories, we talk about how they often dictate the old way. So maybe the old way said, keep everyone happy no matter what. Or stay quiet, it's safer that way, or work harder, then maybe you'll be good enough. That those sorts of, the limiting beliefs that you've been working so hard to explore, to work through, to unpack, to find like a shift in that language for ourselves. The old ways made sense at the time, right? They were, like we said, survival strategies. But when someone really begins healing, they discover that those strategies no longer serve them. They kind of start to feel foreign, heavy, and outdated. And that's quite a nice place to be. The new way might look like speaking up. I remember working so closely with a client. She was like overwhelmed when she started to set boundaries. And what that did for her in terms of confidence and, stepping back into like that, her power and her voice. But people were shocked. People were like, whoa, who's this, new person? But she's also started to take care of herself. And here's the challenge as well. The new way feels unnatural at first. It really does. Speaking up, standing up, going into that conversation, whether, whatever it is, it doesn't necessarily need to be completely tied to the trauma. You might be practicing that in a workplace going, I know that I'm not being paid what I should be being paid. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to challenge that. And I'm going to, do it with integrity, and I deserve that conversation. And even that practice starts to build in so many shifts for us. But sometimes the brain resists it. Sometimes the body feels like it's in full fight or flight. And that's just deeply because trauma wired your whole nervous system, right? It wired the entire nervous system into thinking that that was the right way forward. So I want you to think a little bit about that. The new way and the old way. It's this idea that the new way, it might just feel weird. You might feel like all sorts of like the body's telling you no, but this is going to be a healthy shift and change. And neuroscience really shows us that the more someone practices a new behavior, the more the brain rewires through neuroplasticity. At first, setting boundaries feels terrifying. I remember my client being like, I never say no. But, eventually just saying no to some things, or, setting a stance that like, actually, I'm not going to be there for that, or that doesn't feel good for me right now. Thank you so much but that doesn't feel like the right choice for me today. I remember a coach that I personally had. She was one of the most dynamic people I ever worked with, but the most profound thing that I learned from her was she said to me, you don't have to explain yourself all the time. If you just said no, no, thank you, full stop. Like, or if you're from, period. You don't always have, you don't owe people an explanation like maybe society has made us feel, actually that it just doesn't work for me right now. Thank you. That's enough. That is enough. And that's a great place to start with setting those boundaries. But it feels hard and it feels strange and it feels like you're going against everything you've ever been doing. Because it is, and because your body's been, the whole of the body's wired to think that the opposite way is safe, but our conflicting identities is like this internal tug of war, and it's where the real struggle comes in. Is trauma often splits identity into the two parts. One part longs for freedom, time, rest, self-care, and another part feels like truly deeply obligated to really serve others, especially family. I remember there's a chapter of life where I literally did not have a minute to breathe. And I just spent all day, every day doing everything for everybody else. I hadn't even realized that there was a huge habit, there was a huge limiting belief around that. And it was a belief that, like, if I help others, if I'm the best version of myself and say yes to everybody and don't let anybody net down, then it almost makes the trauma okay. And it wasn't until I started to work through the trauma that I realized I just created this belief that made me feel safe, that made me feel like, I was still a good person, blah, 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 blah. This tug of war can absolutely be brutal. It's not just an inner voice, it's this body wide response, right? The nervous system, like we said, feels pulled in two directions. It creates tension, anxiety, exhaustion. And that's maybe sometimes you're feeling like this. I really want to make a change. I really want to, shift that belief. But it is hard. And I get why sometimes, definitely like, hey, we're human. It is normal if you do go back and make those choices again. You go into that comfort zone. But again, the more we do something, it's like that old age phrase that I keep using about neuroplasticity, the beaten down path. The more that you do something outside of your comfort zone that we know is deeply healthy for you, the more the brain and the entire body will start to shift, and it will feel better every time you do it. It's just like when you start a new job, you start it, you feel nervous, you're not sure if you can take on, especially if it's a new challenge, but all of a sudden, like 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road, even a year, the same thing that you might have felt anxious about tackling has become something that's like second nature, and it doesn't take half as long. There's no worries around it. There's nothing about but confidence. You can train other people. It's all that's what we're on about. But we have to push ourselves out of that comfort zone sometimes in order to just work through, those limiting beliefs. So I've got another little journaling question for you, or even just something to reflect upon now in your mind. You can, do mind map or write or whatever, pause it if you like. But when you think of your own life, where do you personally feel this tug of war most strongly? Is it between work and home? Is there like a tug? Maybe family and self? You feel like you're the giver, you give everything to everyone, and it's very hard to prioritize taking care of yourself. Or between the person you are now and the person you want to become. There's so many pulls. It could be other things. It could just be between you and family. It's very difficult to set boundaries with, those people that you truly deeply care for, their opinions, all of it, and when people name this conflict, when you can really maybe start to identify it, it'll really help. People start to begin to see that it's not a weakness, it's just trauma identity in action. That's all. So if you were able to pick out where you might feel this tug of war, that's you going, okay, that's my trauma identity. That's me pushing and pulling between who I am, who I've become based on past beliefs, and also where you want to aim to get to, like where you want to feel. And often it is, a big, it's a big shift. And it's recognizing some of those roots. So that's a really good question to get a little bit more to the root of, where is it that you feel that real deep pull? Where is that end pulling just as hard? And are you able to pull and win that tug of war? And it's okay sometimes if you don't, it's okay if you, but it's really powerful to continue to keep going because it will feel easier and easier. But let's talk a little bit about some of those tough things. Like the biggest word that comes to me personally when we look at this stuff is the idea of when you change, you feel like guilt. You kind of think like, what will people think of me if I start digging my heels in? And that doesn't need to be like in a negative, but when I start to say like, actually, I'm sorry, no. One of the heaviest weights trauma survivors carry is guilt. Guilt is huge, guilt and shame. I could be here all day talking about that, but especially guilt tied to family duty. So, trauma often wires people to believe their worth is measured by how much they sacrifice. I definitely have felt that. It's like we've almost been hardwired to think like the more I do for others, the more kindness I show, blah, 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 like that's the measure of me. But when we start prioritizing ourselves, or you start prioritizing yourself, rush starts to come in. Like there's this big phrase, I'm being selfish. But I do think that word needs to be revisited because let's go back to the quote, about I'm sure you've heard the whole oxygen mask analogy. When you get on an airplane, they're forever saying like, don't help the person beside you, don't help your family and your children. You need to get that oxygen mask on you first. You need to know what you're doing, then you can help others. Because if you can't breathe and you're helping everybody else, then we've got all these people who put themselves second. It's quicker to get it on you based on where they are, where you are. And it's not selfish. It's actually self-love. And when we use that kind of term love, I'm just talking about taking some time out to work on you to, whether it's, your health, your well-being, your mental health, like taking time out to do something that brings you joy. All of this, like these are the puzzle pieces that help to refill your cup, to give you that oxygen. And so you're not letting anybody down. That's a phrase we hear a lot. I'm letting people down if I don't do that. um Sometimes there's this old phrase, well, they need me more than I need me. They need me more than I need me, right? That's such an interesting phrase. I've heard that quite often. And I think it's powerful just to reflect, like, does any of that resonate with you? But it's really powerful because guilt really locks people back into kind of those old trauma patterns. And research on like lots of family systems shows that many trauma survivors end up in something that we call enmeshment cycles, where their identity is kind of fused with meeting family needs at the expense of their own. It's a lot. It's a lot, isn't it? I think, how often do we compromise? Um, and don't really take enough time to kind of work on our own healing, and healing requires balance. It requires really recognizing that taking care of yourself isn't betrayal to anybody else. It's genuinely, that is survival, like real survival. And I think that that's really powerful. There's so much here to kind of get into depth with guilt. But I've got another little reflection question for you. Again, write it, reflect on it, mind map it, stop the video if you want. But can you maybe think of one area where you might be feeling guilty for choosing yourself? And is that guilt really about who you are, or is it an old story trauma taught you? Big questions there. Um, I think that's big, and asking yourself sometimes, what is driving me to feel this way? What is this guilt telling me? What is true? So I'll ask you the question one more time. Can you think of one area, maybe when I was speaking about that topic that you came to mind, where you feel guilty for choosing yourself? And then ask yourself, is that guilt really about who you are? Choosing yourself is never the wrong choice. there's a real lack of selfishness sometimes in the world. Um, we do have overall humanity is good and do have great hearts and do want to, help. Um, Again, is this feeling of guilt an old story trauma taught you? A really nice piece to kind of just, yeah, feel. And unresolved trauma and negative beliefs, like the core issue here is that when trauma, hasn't been fully resolved, or it really leaves behind these negative beliefs that shape identity. These beliefs can lead us to living this life. Marissa Peers like coined her entire coaching business on the phrase like, I am not good enough. The amount of the population that have somehow created this thought that you're not enough as you are. And that's because society, media, consumerism, all of it is tricking us into feeling like we are not enough. You're not enough, like in this sense, in this body. Look at like the wild choices human beings are making in terms of like, trying to feel good, the products that we're selling, the choices that we make for, I don't know, beauty or whatever. You just never feel good enough no matter what the choice is that you make. And all those choices are there to build confidence, but there's another element saying, you think of like a filter on, if any of you access social media, if you were to like just put like a filter, or you see young people doing it now, I kind of fear for like that younger generation who are not seeing themselves ever just as they are. There's a filter there, right? The lips are more plump in the video or in the screen or the filter, and that makes them feel confident. And then obviously we make these choices, which is not bad. I'm not knocking it if it makes us feel confident. It's all good. But what I'm saying is that there is a message there within us saying that we are not good enough. And I want us to feel, with or without any shifts or changes, that we are good enough. And that no matter the trauma, that we are still good enough. We're good enough with or without anything else. You've got a good, kind heart. Ask yourself, like, overall, I bet you every single one of you can say, like, if I really broke it down, if somebody was looking at you, they could say to you, actually, they're a really nice person. And that makes you good enough. If you're trying to learn, that's good enough. That's it. That's enough. It's just to breathe and to be and to, well, just be. That's it. But we live in a society that makes us feel not so much, makes us feel like we don't deserve happiness. Our trauma tells us, I don't deserve happiness. Our trauma tells us, if I change, people will leave me. People won't like me anymore if I make these changes, if I start saying no, or if I, set some boundaries. Like, there is a real sense of that. And I feel it. I feel you if that's something that you're feeling. But these are not truths. They're trauma echoes. They come from moments where the brain encoded survival messages that got stuck. And cognitive science shows that beliefs shape perception. The brain filters through what it expects. If someone expects rejection, that's our reticular activating system. They start to see rejection everywhere. It's crazy. If they expect to fail, their brain will highlight every sign of failure. It's like that. There's like this part of the brain, you're almost planting that seed, being like, yeah, let all of that in. I like to call it our Google search engine. If you type into Google, like, today's going to be a great day, it's going to filter and find some positive things like all over that Google search engine. But if you put today's going to be a terrible day, it's going to start giving you every drop of information to prove that to you. And this is what happens, if we don't kind of recognize what we're feeling, and start to explore what it is, that desired state we want to be in, and start to push our brains to think in that way, shift a little bit of our actions in that way, then our brain's going to start to see it as, things that are within our reach, rather than, this shaped perception. So this is why unresolved trauma sometimes keeps us stuck. It convinces like people that their old identity is the only one they're allowed to have. But that's not the truth. You are enough as you are in every way, shape, or form. Every choice that you make is great. But you are enough in every way, in every sense. There's nothing that needs to change. You are your best. You are enough despite your trauma. You genuinely are enough. And that's hard to believe. You do deserve, deep happiness. And, if you make changes, maybe people might find it strange at first. Maybe you feel like, oh, but they're not going to not love you and care for you and support you, if these are people that are meant to be in your life, you know so strong emotions and decision overload is a little bit a part of this. Another challenge is that trauma supercharges emotions. So when someone is caught between what they want, for themselves and what others expect, it doesn't always feel like a simple decision. It sometimes just feels deeply overwhelming. And that's because trauma leaves the nervous system on high alert, right? Every choice feels loaded with a bit of danger. The amygdala, the brain's alarm system fires, and a simple choice could threaten survival. And that's why people say, I feel like even the smallest decisions are exhausting. That is not laziness. It's just trauma physiology, right? And so when you think about making a choice just for yourself, what emotions show up most strongly for you? So if you're going to make this choice and it's just for you, does it feel good? Or does it feel like there's other emotions like fear or shame or guilt or anger popping in? And notice which one might feel the loudest. It's often the one tied to your earliest survival patterns. Yeah, it's just, what is coming up for you. And it is normal, as human beings, to have a fear of change. Let's talk a little bit about that as we kind of continue wrapping up on our topic. But there is a real sense of fear of change. There's so many, psychologists explore like the change cycles and the change models, and how, human beings react to that. But even when somebody knows change is good for them, the unknown can feel absolutely, utterly paralyzing. It's the truth. That's when we go into the fight, freeze. And trauma teaches the nervous system that the familiar, even if it is painful, is safer than the unknown. That's why so many people stay maybe in maybe unhealthy patterns, jobs, relationships. The known feels survivable, the unknown feels dangerous. Neuroscience research confirms that the brain treats uncertainty as a potential threat, right? It's just the unknown. It doesn't always have to be, anything huge, just going into a situation where you don't know what that looks like. I still get butterflies, and get nervous about certain things, but the prefrontal cortex struggles to override the amygdala. And that's that part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, that helps us think with clarity, make sense of our decisions before we make them. But the prefrontal cortex struggles to override the amygdala, the alarm system, when uncertainty is high. That's just, that's just us. That's just human beings. And that's why fear can feel so physical. When you get that super tight chest, racing heart, sweaty palms. But yeah, here's the most important, and it's the most hopeful piece of all of this, is that fear is also a massive sign of growth. If someone feels a little bit afraid, it means they're standing at the edge of a new identity. It means the brain is stretching. And with practice, that fear can shift maybe even into excitement. And I think that that's really powerful message, is to say that, like, we're talking about healthy fear. We're talking about getting out of your comfort zone, trying something new, putting yourself in a position that's, going to create something great for you that never felt like you could do, joining a group, whatever it is that, setting that boundary. If you lean into something that's self-care, something that is good for you, but you feel the fear, kind of work through that. And I do think that it'll make a big difference. And I'm gonna just side note, if you've not watched the TED Talk that is on Netflix for free by Brene Brown. If you just type in Brene, Brene Brown, into your Netflix, it's gonna bring up this incredible TED Talk that's so good that it's on Netflix. And she talks a lot about this, like leaning in to discomfort, leaning into vulnerability in order to find, that person that we are really maybe aspiring to be, that, in 5 years, what does that look like? That she's just incredible in the way that she delivers those messages through storytelling. So a little look. Yeah, my closing thought today is just building a new identity after trauma. It's not a straight path. We're windy, we're up, we're down, we move forward, we move back, we move sideways. It's layered with all this, the human emotions, guilt, fear, conflict, strong emotions, excitement, confidence. It's got layers. But it's also filled with huge, huge possibility. And post-traumatic growth shows us that people can, and they really do kind of rewire. They can build that new identity. And every time they honor themselves instead of guilt, they start to rebuild this new space. And every time they take a step into the unknown, for a positive route, a positive decision, they prove that they're not defined by their trauma. And so my big, big question for you tonight, or today or this morning, whatever point that you're looking at this, is who do you want to become? Because trauma may have written the first chapters of your story, but you really truly get to write that ending.